Okay, good day to everyone. Thanks for joining us over here on AFIL's first webinar dedicated to the Beresheet, the Israel's first spacecraft aimed at landing on the moon next week. We over here at the America-Israel Friendship League are excited to sponsor this conversation. This is exactly the kind of outreach of information that we are promoting. We've been around since 1971, and our focus is upon promoting the relationship between the people of Israel and the United States through enhancing the familiarity with what Israel is and what are some of the great and inspiring things that are coming from there. Today, we are initiating a proactive outreach via webinars dedicated to share in this vision. And Beresheet definitely falls within the category of Israeli inspirations. As the first privately funded and backed spacecraft to be launched to the moon, it is the epitome of Israeli chutzpah and can-do attitude. Starting from some paper and pencil sketches, through harnessing the power of NASA, SpaceX, and Israel aircraft industry, it's a fascinating story. And with us today are those who have made and are still making this happen. Starting from Maurice Kahn, who started from the Zahav through OREC and Amdocs, he's truly one of the pioneers of the Israeli high-tech industry. Just last year, he was honored by the AFL with the Partners for Democracy Award for his achievements. Mr. Kahn is also known as the one placing a semblance of reality on the Beresheet project with a simply placed question: do you have any money? The rest is history. Ms. Daphna Jackson, the CEO of the Kahn Foundation, the person who has kept all the parts moving, and the one who Morris probably asks daily why she could not rein him in. Ofer Doron, General Manager of Space Division of the Israel Aerospace Industries. It was the support of an organization like IAA with its infrastructure and ability to understand and convert complex projects like this that made it possible to convert Beresheet from the drawing board to the final assembly in the brief period it took. Yariv Bash, one of the co-founders of SpaceIL, an electronics and computer engineer by background. Yariv is one of the individuals who conceived of Beresheet while sitting in a bar. I hear on the sideline that Morris has basically banned them from drinking in the future. Finally, Idon Tebi, the relatively newcomer, the current CEO of SpaceIL, who came on board to make sure that the company transitioned successfully from startup to a real venture. Before we start, we have a couple of housekeeping points. The format of the webinar today will be questions that I'll pose to the panel. We'll also be showing in the background some images and video footage as we speak. We ask for the attendees to send out questions to the panel before the session, while we'll be adding some as well. If you still have questions, please use the chat within the webinar question panel and make sure that you send it to the panelists only, not to all attendees. Time permitting, we'll get to these as well. And then finally, we will also be recording the webinar so people will have access to it after the session is ended. With that being said, let's turn to the panel. So before we start, actually, Ofer, can you just give us a quick update where we are with the journey and the Lunar Capture?
Well, since we were launched about 5 weeks ago, we've been circling the Earth in ever-growing orbits. And our current orbit brings us to about 420,000 kilometers above Earth, so just above the Earth's trajectory. We've passed our final perigee, that's the closest point of approach to the Earth, a couple of days ago, successfully. We've made some corrections along the way to our course, and we are en route to intercepting the moon in 2 days, Thursday afternoon. And there we'll be performing a complex maneuver to get into Earth, to get out of Earth's orbit and into the moon's orbit. So we'll be being captured by the moon by our maneuver. And after that, we are on the way to landing.
Thank you. Ido, what challenges do you anticipate with the landing itself?
The spacecraft will land autonomously. Actually, we'll send it a command to land, and it will land by itself. We have never tested it, so we're not sure how it will work. We have done a lot of experiments, a lot of tests in the lab using the simulator, but we have never tested the spacecraft to land on the moon. Our spacecraft has a very low redundancy, and it is bothering me. One sensor that will fail may cause the failure of the whole mission. In order to begin the landing procedure, we need to give the spacecraft the exact location where it is. And this accurate positioning is very risky. We also have a special sensor, the landing sensor, which is a laser sensor. This is the first time that this sensor will be on the moon, so it is very risky too. But as Ofer said before, first we have to capture the moon on the coming Thursday.
Good luck. Yariv, let's go back to day one. And can you tell us a bit about, as you were sitting there in the bar, I mean, what your ideas were, and what was it at the bar that inspired you guys?
Well, the project started a few days before the bar itself. I was actually a few days before that at a friend's house, and I had an idea to send a small plastic spacecraft to the edge of space.
No, go ahead.
Are you playing a video or?
No, go ahead. No, go ahead.
Sure. So at that friend's house, I had an idea to send a small plastic spacecraft to the edge of space and call that the first Israeli spacecraft. And my friend asked me, well, what about the Google Lunar X Prize competition to send an unmanned spacecraft to the moon? And I told him that he's nuts. And while strolling the streets back home, after drinking a few glasses of scotch at my friend's house, I asked myself, well, if I'd open an Israeli team, how should I name it? And that night I registered the spaceil.com domain name and started researching the competition. And then I posted on my Facebook wall, who wants to go to the moon? And Jonathan, who was a friend of mine on Facebook, wrote me, Kfir, wrote me back on Facebook, well, if you're serious, I'm in. And I also emailed Jonathan, which I knew from a different event. And I told him, listen, I have a crazy idea. Let's meet up and talk about that. And so the three of us met in a pub in Hulon, in a suburb of Tel Aviv, and started thinking about sending an Israeli spacecraft to the moon.
Thank you. Morris, as one who's been around technology startups, what was it that you think drove this group? What role do you think that the naivete, basically, of the youth, not being aware of limitations, played here?
I think, you have to be careful of three young engineers who cook up an idea in a bowl. But actually, I wasn't really careful enough. And if you ask me what drove them, I think, first of all, the challenge. I think it was sort of piqued their imagination. They're young engineers. They felt, well, we could do it. I think the $20 million prize probably played a part as well. But really, I think what you really got to look at is that these guys came out of a bar, and this idea was really, in the beginning, a crazy idea. It was really a very difficult challenge. It was almost an impossible challenge, and maybe this is what attracted these three young people.
Thank you. Yariv, sort of, I apologize for the noise.
Sorry, is that a question to me?
No.
No.
Yeah. No, Yariv, in the background right now, we can basically see the video of the path Can you basically tell us a bit about it?
So I can't really see the video, or okay, perfect. So basically, we were launched from Florida, and now you can see our first orbits around the Earth. What we do is that with time we increase the apogee, which is the furthest point from Earth, or you can call it our altitude, to a point where we'll be able to meet with the moon. We're talking about roughly 400,000 kilometers, or more than 200,000 miles. And then what we'll be doing, we'll be decelerating to enter the moon's orbit. Then we'll start orbiting the Earth. We'll then need to decelerate some more to lower our speed until we reach a very low orbit around the moon. Once we reach the right point, we'll be just giving the spacecraft a command to start the landing phase. And from that moment on, the spacecraft will automatically start landing on its own all the way to the surface of the moon, roughly 15 feet or so above the surface of the moon. The velocity will go to 0, and then we'll just shut off the motors, and the spacecraft will perform a free fall all the way to the surface of the moon. The legs of the spacecraft were designed to sustain that fall. And hopefully, once we are on the moon, we'll be able to send back images and videos to Earth.
Well, thank you. I mean, obviously, this is a very complex project with a lot of moving parts, but I believe what we saw also in this project is very much of a typical project creep from the aspect of financing and funding. I mean, I believe that the original budget was about $8 million, and it escalated to questions. I know that there's a bit of a debate if it's 95 or $100 million, but what took you really basically from that original budget up? I mean, where did you see that project creep?
So with time, the project matured. And if in the beginning we talked about physical limitations as a way of let's say, estimating our budget, in reality, let's say in the beginning we thought the spacecraft will weigh less than 5 kilograms, 10 pounds or so. But if you want to launch on a commercial launcher, for instance, you need 3 safety valves between the fuel and the thruster. And each one of those valves can weigh 3 or 4 pounds. And so the total all of these devices is almost the size of the spacecraft we envisioned. And as the project matured and became a reality, we realized that we have to use qualified parts with space heritage, and those are usually a lot bigger than what we've envisioned. And of course, it's not a linear scale. I can't just say, okay, I'm going to increase the size of the fuel tanks by 10%. You've got small fuel tanks, medium fuel tanks, you don't have anything in the middle. And you can't just start designing your own fuel tanks. You have to use off-the-shelf parts. So with time, the project grew in an iterative way all the way to the current weight of a bit more than half a ton.
Okay, thanks. Daphna, why do you think there was no more funding from the government? I mean, I know that actually that sort of turned out to be one of the the side benefits, but to say, to be able to claim that it was really the first privately funded, but why do you think there was no more government participation in this?
So I would say that it comes down to 2 reasons. Like Mars stated before, in the beginning, everybody thought that we were crazy. The government as well looked at this idea and said, you know, other countries did it for billions of dollars. This is your budget. How are you going to do that? So they thought we were a bit off the wall, as Mars says. But I also think, and I say this sadly, that I don't think that Israel is in a place where they truly understand the effect and how important it is that we should be involved in space and educate our next generation. And that I say with a heavy heart, because when 50 years ago, the United States went to the moon, they believed in it. They had conflicts in the government, but they supported it and they believed in it, and they saw what it can do for the United States. And Israel is just not there yet. That's what I feel. So,
do you think this is changing anything?
Of course, yes, definitely. You can see it with the younger generation. The volunteers did an amazing job, and the young generation is very involved. And I think that now the government is understanding how these projects, even the message of the project of dare to dream and follow your dreams. And there are brilliant minds in Israel that can actually make these dreams happen. Everybody's asking, how did you do this for a budget of 95 or $100 million? That's the $5 million doesn't make the big difference, but it teaches the younger generation to pursue their dreams, and that Israel has brilliant minds and that can achieve these things. So definitely, I think that this project changed the thinking of Israel, and I'm sure that we're going to see the government support projects that don't always seem so on the norm, I would say. But yes, definitely.
Thank you. Ofer, at what point was the connection made with the Israel Aerospace Industries?
They started talking to us relatively early. I think in late 2011, we started having first conversations, and I was extremely enthusiastic and very skeptic at the beginning. And we slowly started getting into it more and more.
So not only the government.
No, not only the government. Not only the government. And in 2013, we were already in love with the program, and we decided to invest several $1 million of our R&D funds in working together with SpaceIL to make it happen. By that time, we knew it was going to cost tens of millions. We never guessed it was going to cost 100 million, Morris, but we knew it was going to be tens of millions. By the way, 100 million is by far the cheapest mission ever to get to the moon. So it's a great achievement, but it's still a tremendous amount of money, especially coming from private purses, most of it. From there on, we moved on. In 2015, we were already full-term partners and working under contract with SpaceIL and investing more and more together to move forward on the program with a full program team. So actually from 2015, when we were on a full-scale program to launch, was less than 4 years, which is an incredible schedule for getting a spacecraft ready.
Definitely, but I guess the question sort of looms from this is how, and I can understand the enthusiasm and the excitement, but still, how could you get an organization like the Israel Aerospace Industries? I mean, there's a difference between being enthusiastic and excited about a project and getting an organization like that to actively actually participate with a small startup.
So I went back a month ago. I had to present to my board how we're getting ready for the landing. And I pulled out the slides that I prepared in 2015 or 2013 to justify the R&D budget. What would II get out of it? And we wanted to get 4 things out of it then, and we got them. We wanted to encourage civil space in Israel. Daphne alluded to that before, that it wasn't strong enough. And I think SpaceIL and Beresheet are getting tremendous excitement in Israel, and it's going to move civil space forward. And I hope there will be more budget for civil space. We wanted to get experience in how to work with a startup. We saw where new space was going. And as a traditional space company, we wanted to start working with a new space company, in this case an NGO, but the organization is very similar. And it was a great challenge, and it is a great challenge to work together, a small organization, a large organization, both sharing the engineering, sharing the responsibilities. The big guy's usually in the lead. In this case, it's the small guys leading. It's not trivial to make this happen together. So we wanted to learn and practice in this, and we're putting it in, and we're moving forward with other programs that use this model. And we wanted to increase our brand recognition in the space world, and we wanted to increase IAI's visibility in Israel and positive name for IAI in Israel. And all of these achievements have been, or all of these goals have been achieved fantastically even before we launched. So I think we got into it for good reasons. There's one more reason that I didn't think of at the time, and that was we could actually make business with that. And maybe we'll talk a bit about that later on.
Sure. Ido, what about the partnership with NASA? How was that created?
It began as a short presentation for NASA's administrator that visited Israel half a year ago. He asked to learn about SpaceIL, about its small spacecraft, and he was amazed from this spacecraft, simple spacecraft. And I think he was amazed from the cost of the spacecraft, $100 million or less than $100 million. He didn't believe us. So he proposed a collaboration. And it took 2 months to sign a collaboration agreement with NASA. SpaceIL, the small SpaceIL, signed a collaboration agreement with NASA. So they put a laser reflector on the spacecraft, which will use as a beacon on the moon. They will be able to locate the location of the spacecraft. We will share the scientific measurements that we will measure on the moon with NASA. They gave us the permission to use their DSN, the Deep Space Communication Network, for communicating with the spacecraft during the landing and during its staying on the moon. And they also proposed to use the lunar satellite to take images of the landing area of our spacecraft, and even to practice our teams to locate and track spacecraft or a satellite around the moon. So it was very beneficial for us and also for NASA, this collaboration.
That is impressive, by the way, to be able to get a contract within 2 months with an organization like NASA is truly impressive. Congratulations on that. And Morris, from a business perspective, at what point did you think actually that this actually might work?
Well, first of all, I never really looked upon this as a business. I never saw there was going to be any real financial fallout.
Sure.
It happened in the beginning. I really felt that these young chaps needed some assistance and needed some help. And really out of sympathy, I actually gave them money and I said, carry on. And then I realized as we carried on that if we didn't have an objective that locked us in terms of time, we'd never get this finished. So I agreed to pay for the launch. And they told me the launch would cost about $5 million, and we could actually get somebody to take our spacecraft into space. And I said, I'll pay this $5 million. And I felt once they had a date, they would work towards it. Well, what happened was they ran out of money, and they came to me and said, can we use part of this $5 million for work that we need in progress? And basically, I allowed myself to get sucked into this business. And really, I got sucked in so far and so deep that I felt it was a little bit difficult to get back. Now, I'm a member of a group called Sea Space Symposium. It's a group of people who are involved in space and the ocean. And we meet twice a year. And when I met them and I told them that I was involved with putting a spacecraft on the moon, they looked at me with deep sympathy. Now, these are people like Buzz Aldrin, who's been on the moon. And these are people who are astronauts and people from NASA. And they said, how much is this going to cost you? Well, I told them $8 million. And this look of pity was really something. And they said, look, Morris, less than $50 million, you don't even have anything to talk about. Now, I should have listened to them then, but I didn't. And what happened was I got so far deep into it that it was actually difficult to get back out. So my commitment to them was really, once I was in, I did it myself. I can't blame them. And I never in my wildest dreams thought that we would get to something like $100 million. But once we got going, we were actually in. And you know, it's a challenge. And And actually, I love a challenge, and I think that these three young chaps love this challenge as well. And that's the story. It was never a business venture. It's just the kind of thing that happens.
And Daphna, I think one of the things that we've seen throughout from the previous questions is that there are a lot of moving parts, a lot of different organizations. And I think it's Morris who was quoted as saying that you're essentially the glue that kept us together. How do you do that?
Well, I think that if you would ask anyone here, if you would ask Ofer or Ido or Yariv, the person working beside them, they would also feel that the person who's working beside them was the glue. So one of the things that I've learned about Morris, he says that his success is a result of two things, of luck and of having the right people, having the right partnerships or the right people working with him. And I think that the team that I worked with, it was Esti from IAI and Moti and Oli from the PR company, and of course the founders and a few people from Space.il. We were just a very good team that even when we had our differences, and we had a lot of differences, there's a lot of, everybody feels differently about things. Everybody wants a lot of times, a lot of challenges. So I think that the people that I worked with all had the same, they wanted the same thing, for Beresheet to land safely on the moon, and for us to create the Beresheet effect. So I can't say that the credit, I'm very flattered by Morris's statement, but that's because I work with Morris, but I can't say that it's only me. There were a lot of people who were part of this, and that really got this thing going.
As they say, it takes a village.
So yes, it takes a village, and you just have to always remember to stay true to yourself, be kind, and just try and just believe in what you feel, and choose your battles, like in marriage. Just choose your battles.
So you say this is a good marriage consulting?
Well, I can tell you that I learned a lot about relationships. Yes, I wanted to get up and leave a few times. I wasn't allowed to fight up all night fighting. Yes, all things, but I can definitely say that it was worth it. And this is one of the projects out of many that I've learned a lot from the people who were involved in it. And each one of them has taught me a lot. Yes.
So talking about sort of like teaching effects, it's a nice segue to Ido, from the perspective of Space.il, what would you say that a small startup can learn actually from partnering with a company like Israel Aerospace Industries?
For Space.il, it's an important partnership. We needed the IAI experience, heritage, and of course their infrastructure. In Space.il, we have a mix of engineers, young engineers, and veterans of the IAI, veterans from IAI. So the eldest engineers taught the youngest how to work, but working with the IAI too, we have learned a lot. And the teamwork that we had between the Space.il engineers and the IAI engineers, I think gave mutual benefits for all of us.
Thanks. Ofer, I'd like to flip that question basically, and from your perspective, I know you touched upon it a bit before, but really I'm sort of interested, what do you think an organization like Israel Aerospace Industries can and should have learned from working with a small startup like Space.il?
Well, first of all, I think it's something that couldn't happen in a different format. An organization like IAI would not have the audacity to move forward with a program like this.
Yeah.
A startup like Space.il doesn't have the experience to go it alone. And so what we learned was how to make this work together. And it was far from trivial, a lot of humility along the way. So I mean, my engineers, they know everything. I mean, absolutely everything. And convincing them that some young engineers from Space.il know things better is very difficult. And they don't always want to hear. And we have to choose the teams carefully so that we put the right people to work with them, because not everyone can do that. We also moved away from some of our comfort zones. In space, more than other places, you don't take too many risks because you can't fix it up there. So heritage is king. If you want everything as it was, I mean, I've done it 20 times. Why would I do it differently? It's proven in space. But the young upstarts are doing things very differently. And so it's challenging the way of thought and how to take risks. It's an excellent experience. Very difficult. Culturally, very difficult from an engineering point of view sometimes. Very, very rewarding across the board. And we are working on this model with other programs nowadays. And I think it's fantastic.
Great, that's good to hear. Well, we're talking sort of really about the contributions in the assembly. We're seeing in the background now a video sort of like that's showing the assembly. Can you just sort of describe some of the complexities in the assembly process?
So what we're seeing now is the construction of the propulsion system, the main fuel tanks and all the valves and everything else that goes around them. And they're put into the structure, and designing the structure was no trivial feat. It had to be very lightweight, very strong, adapted to be carried on another satellite, take all these engines on it. And then the landing legs that you see being put on right now, very complex, designed for landing and then hopping and landing again, lightweight, folding, far from trivial. And then after we did all the assembly with all the different parts, we go into testing, vibration testing, acoustics testing, thermal vacuum testing, which we actually had to redo partially because we found some things that had to be improved. So very complex testing, a lot of people involved around the clock doing assembly and doing testing for quite a long period over the last year. So a lot learned there as well in integrating the two teams together very, very, very closely.
Thank you. Morris, it's basically you said that the image that we can see right now on the screen was one of the best gifts that you could have ever received. Do you want to tell us a bit about it?
Yes, actually, on the 5th of March, I turned 89. And on the 5th of March, Beresheet, our little satellite in space, took a photograph of the Earth taken from the satellite together with this little plaque, small country, big dreams. And that for me was actually the finest gift that I could have ever got. And I can tell you, this is the most expensive selfie that has ever been taken.
I could only just imagine that you wish that they might have actually adapted it to include like another statement just added.
You see it?
Yes, I can see it. Yeah, it's a beautiful gift. I really appreciate it, and I remember it always.
No, Mars, but do you see what they added on the bottom? Can you show him the photo again?
Oh, sure.
I don't think he's.
What did it say?
Look on the bottom in red.
In red, yes.
Happy birthday, Morris, from all of us at Space.il.
Oh. Yeah, that was actually a gift. It was very nice. I appreciated it.
Okay, so turning to Ido. Ido, you're a sophisticated business person. You know, why did you join the project, and what were the challenging points that you saw when you joined it?
To tell the truth, I'm in the project because of Morris. When I sat in his office, I saw his eyes, the light in his eyes when he's talking about the spacecraft. and the national project, I couldn't say no. But it is a real national project, and I wanted to be involved in another national project, national challenge. And also, I met and learned about the excellent teams, the excellent engineers, the Space IL and the III, and it is, I wanted to work with them. I wanted to finalize the project with them. And these are the reasons why I came. The major challenge was to coordinate the project plan in order to arrive to the launching site on time, which was very, very difficult, but we have done it.
Which we can also now see in the background. Daphna, were there any moments when you tried to stop Mars?
Well, you know, looking back, you showed that video before how they assembled the spacecraft, and we see all these visuals, and suddenly it takes me back a bit. There were moments that I never try and stop Mars from doing anything, but I do sit him down and ask him, Mars, is this what you really want to do? And in life, there's always a price to pay. Not necessarily in terms of money, but there's a price to pay. Mars, before he started this project, was a private man. No one really knew anything about him. Everybody thought that he was a man who lives on the yacht and doesn't pay taxes. And he was happy with that, and he was fine with that. And one of the prices that he had to pay was coming out to the public and talking about the project, because one of the things that we learned was that the people who need to talk about the project are the people who live the project, who love the project, who believe in the project, that it comes from their soul. And while we were raising money or trying to get to the public, the only people who really who were able to pass on this message were people like Ofer and Morris and the founders. And when Ido joined, it's, as Ido stated, he came into this project because he saw Morris and what he saw in his eyes. So those are the people that need to talk about it. And Morris, as being the father of the project, I can't say that I tried to stop him. I just asked him if this is what he wants and if he's prepared to pay the price. So $42 million later, obviously he agreed to pay the price. And one of the things that I enjoy is the fact that people get to know about Mars. And I think that our generation lacks leadership of this kind. Of doing things, not everything is about money, not everything is about making money, learning more about the other projects that he's involved in. So I feel that he made the right decision, but the decision is always his. You can't try to make Mars do anything. You can make it feel as if you're doing it, but in the end, it's totally him. You can't stop him.
Okay, so Mars, turning to you, what you described before is really sort of the typical dilemma of any entrepreneur, is that of sunk costs. Was there any moment that you said enough is enough?
I'll tell you, there were times that I got a little despondent. To try and raise money to put a spacecraft on the moon, it's a little bit weird. It's really a bit of a cockamamie idea, let's face it. And very few people have the imagination. And actually, it was very difficult to raise money. As a matter of fact, I think I raised money from perhaps four major donors, one of which was the Adelson family, and they were actually very instrumental in giving me a significant donation right at the beginning. And I really appreciated that. And that actually sort of at least gave me some kind of support. But there were moments that I really felt that this was a mission impossible. And I would lose sleep at night. I'd lose sleep because I couldn't see how we were going to do it. And in the end, I came to the solution. And it was very simple. Put the money up yourself, and then you don't have to worry. And so help me God, once I made that decision that I was going to underwrite this project, and that's what I basically did, everything fell into place. I was more relaxed. My bank manager obviously wasn't, and it really worked. But there were times that I really didn't feel good about it at all. It's not an easy project to raise money for. It's difficult for people to understand the challenge. It was difficult for them to see what would come out of it. And I tell you, I'm amazed. I'm absolutely blown away by what has come out of it. The reaction of the public, the reaction of the American public, the reaction of the scientific community, the space community has really been overwhelming. And they believe, and I agree with them, I think we've done something, and I think we've achieved something great. And I think when we land on the moon, that's going to be the real icing on the cake. But yeah, there were times I got despondent. But I like to carry things through. I don't like to give up in the middle. And as Daphne said, you know, apart from having a soul, apart from having your heart in the project, you've got to have the tenacity to take it through to the end. And on this, I'd just like to make one point. At some point in time, I realized that the manager who was managing would not be able to complete this project, would not be able to complete it in time. And that was when I made a decision that we had to do something. And I did something. I resigned from the company, created a bit of a crisis, and that enabled me to bring in Ido. And one thing Ido has done, he completed the project, he got the project tested, produced on time, and ready to be launched. And to this, I'm really grateful to him. He did the job.
Now, as one who's worked with a lot of startups, I know that's probably one of the most difficult time periods, that transition basically from the startup to the venture. That's when they oftentimes fail. So it's identifying that point. And Ofer, we know that this project has already really benefited the Israel Aerospace Industries directly by the partnership with European Space Agency. Can you tell us a bit about that?
So there's been renewed interest in the space agencies around the world, specifically in NASA and the European Space Agency, in going back to the moon, or actually they call it going forward to the moon, and it's using the moon as a forward base to get to Mars, to get to other places, to put a lunar gateway around the moon, etc. But the agencies don't want to deal in the transportation side of it, in getting to the moon. They want to do stuff on the moon. And so they've put out commercial requests, both NASA and the European Space Agency, ESA, each one in their own format, to commercial companies saying, please take payloads to the moon. We're willing to pay to take payloads to the moon. And we've teamed up with a European company, the largest German satellite company called OHB, which will be proposing a service to the European Space Agency, sort of a FedEx to the moon. Bring payloads to the moon. They'll provide the service. We will be providing OHB with a spacecraft. And hopefully the European Space Agency will move forward with these programs, and we'll get some actual business out of this and maybe get some return on our significant investment. And we're talking with some US companies about partnering with them for similar activities with NASA.
Good luck. Ido, at this point of time, a week before the anticipated landing, how's the team feeling? I mean, they must have some very mixed feelings, because on the one side, it's about to peak, and then, you know, day after, you know, back to the real world. What's the sense?
As it looks now, near the control room, everybody is excited. Everybody's looking and working toward the successful landing. I'm sure that they all thinking about the day after, but they understand that the landing, a successful landing, will be the highlight of their work during the last years. On the day after, they all will look for the next challenge in their life, but they will be able to take with them a very big pride of the achievement that they were involved in.
Definitely. Yariv, I'd like to go off topic for a moment. You're quoted as saying, I can't believe that Israel is landing a spacecraft on the moon, yet we still haven't found a cure for my spine. Do you think really that it's just a question of putting the right minds together, or what?
Well, I think it's a question of resources, as always, money and time. And it's going to take a while, maybe a decade or two, but I'm pretty sure we'll solve the problem of spinal cord injuries as well. It's just a matter of putting the resources at the task. It's a matter of, again, it's business, a matter of market. The market for cancer research, for diabetes, heart diseases is much bigger than spinal cord. So it's going to take a while, but we'll get there at the end.
Okay. I do have some sort of, as we sort of go into the final 10 minutes, I do have some sort of final questions for the panel as a whole, basically. Some of you have already addressed, but I'd like to sort of just quickly, each one of you, if you can sort of quickly just say, what in this project kept you up at night?
We should start.
You're addressing it to.
To the panel, why don't we start? I mean, Daphna, why don't we start from you and we go around the table?
Okay.
Well, I can tell you what actually kept me up at night was trying to raise money. That was actually, I at some point in time developed a complete confidence that we could do the job. But the problem was really raising money. And this really kept me up at night. It really did. We had several other problems. We had problems with one of our vendors who was supposed to provide a very crucial system for us and really held us to ransom. It was a very difficult situation. I managed to solve that, but that kept me up as well. Basically, I lost my privacy. I actually have been a private man all my business life in Israel. And at some point in time, I had to come out of the closet and really, to raise money, to raise the profile of SpaceIL, I had to really become a public figure. And this cost me. And this is the price that I paid. I paid willingly. And let's hope that we can pick up the dividend.
Thank you. The others.
Well, I'll go next. I know I should say there were engineering problems that kept me up at night, but the truth is they didn't. Engineering problems have a way of getting solved. The engineers solve everything if you put enough effort on it, and if not, get the right engineer and they'll figure it out. What kept me up at night was keeping the show running. It's a very difficult show to keep running. A lot of people managing it, a lot of people working down below, keeping my management happy, keeping Morris and his team happy, keeping SpaceIL happy, and making sure everyone was working together. I lost more hours of sleep on keeping people working together and happy than on anything else in this program. And it was worth every minute I lost along the way.
I just want to say that a part of the things that are obvious that kept us, I think, all up at night was the complexity, and is it going to work, and where are we going to raise the money and not raise the money. I think that one of the things that kept me up at night was the fact that in this kind of project, the complexity is on many levels. It's on the level of the technology and the PR, and like Ofer said, having everybody work together. And sometimes people don't, because, and they shouldn't really understand it because they're not sitting in those tables that are making the decisions. But what kept me up at night is that I knew that people's feelings were hurt. People didn't always get the answers that they wanted of why certain decisions were made. And that is one of the things that did keep me up at night, because I felt that it was just difficult to work that way. But I've learned that that's how it works in the bigger the challenge, the bigger the company, the bigger the success, and that's what happens along the way. So, yeah.
It's the human element. It's always tough.
Yes.
You don't.
Yeah, and for me, actually, it was how can I balance between the time and costs and risks. To take the decisions, what risks I can take because of the pressure of time and the limited budget. It was very difficult. During the whole last almost year and a half. That's it. Decisions.
Yariv?
So I can say that in the first few years, it was about keeping the lights on at the offices. I mean, there were months where we didn't have enough funds for salaries for next month, and we had to terminate everyone if we wouldn't have gotten another donation in. So in the first few years, it was really about struggling, surviving, and making sure that the project continues in a positive way and towards a successful project.
And another quick question before I go into some of the questions from the attendees is, if you had a time machine and you could go back in time, what moment would you go back and change, and what moment would you want to go back and relive?
So for me, it's very easy. It's 2 years and 4 weeks ago, while I was snowboarding, I should have taken a right turn instead of a left one, and then I wouldn't be in a wheelchair.
Well, that was simple.
That's simple.
Oh, Phil.
What would I change? I'd probably try to do it faster, but I think that's true for everything all the time, so there's not much of a lesson learned there. What would I like to experience again? There have been so many thrilling moments that you can't count them. Probably the launch up to now, but really what I'd like to relive over and over again is a successful landing, but I think we're still a week and a half shy of that one, so we'll talk about that in a couple of weeks. The one thing I would change of all of this, and my advice to people going out on this path, if you ever do try to do something this complex, both on a project level and on an organization level, try not to do it with all the world's press breathing down your neck. It makes things very challenging.
Well, that's Esti's fault.
Yeah, Daphna?
I think that I would go back to the launch. For me, the launch was just a moment that after so many years, I just could not believe it, that we were actually at that moment and we saw the rocket go up. 2 weeks before the launch, Morris and I visited Cape Canaveral and we saw them putting Beresheet on the satellite all together, on the other satellite. So we had kind of these 2 weeks, I would say, Morris, that we kind of lived the whole launch. And then seeing it go up was just, I haven't had a child yet, but I felt that it was like, I kind of felt that my little baby was going up there, and and I would definitely want to go up to just that feeling, because it's a hard feeling to explain. And what would I change? Wow, there are a lot of things. A lot. There was things that I would come back that I said, many things. There's
Morris,
maybe
what about
one thing that I did right and a lot of things that I did wrong.
Morris? What about yourself?
Well, if I had a time machine, I wouldn't go backwards. I'd go forwards. And the day that I want to go to is the morning after we've landed on the moon and fulfilled the dreams of all these wonderful people who've worked so hard, and actually the people of Israel and those abroad who look to us and actually are hoping with us for a safe landing.
Thank you. Thanks. I have a few questions from some of the attendees. So one question that came in is from David Newman, basically, if you can share what happened during the system reboot after takeoff, how you guys felt at the time, and it actually ties in with another question that came in from Abraham Romano, is what will happen if the computer is reset during the landing's autonomous procedure? And I'm not sure which one wants to take this question.
We didn't have a reboot in the launch. We had a planned communication restart, and that was fine. That was part of the planned procedures. And what took us a little bit of time to say everything's okay was actually some problems with the star trackers that were with us and are still with us, but we found our ways to work around them. If the computer reboots during landing, depending when, we should be okay. If it really does a lot of bad stuff, we won't. So there are many things that can go wrong. It's a very, very complex procedure. We're totally hands off at that stage. We cannot touch the space. Well, we can't even talk to the spacecraft. We can talk, but it's not listening to us. It's totally autonomous during landing, and we've taught it as well as we can to take care of itself. Ask me in a week and a half.
So to Dafna's analogy, it's the phase where you just have to let the children leave home and act on their own.
Yes, yeah. Yes, it is.
And there's another question from Melissa Tinsley of, do you think that this project would have been embarked upon without the Google Award?
Never, ever. And although the prize was canceled, which I think is very regrettable, it actually succeeded in achieving what it set out to do. And that was to encourage non-government missions to the moon. And as we were talking before about ESA and NASA having such programs underway, the Lunar X Prize succeeded. I'm very glad that the X Prize Foundation came back with a, albeit smaller prize. I think it's very fitting and a good end to this amazing, amazing, amazing achievement.
And there were a couple of questions with regard to the moon capture and the descent, basically, and I'll just combine them together. Is at what time and altitude will Beresheet start firing its engine for the descent? How long will it last? And before that also, if you can talk a bit about the actual lunar capture, when is that scheduled and what's the duration of the burn for that?
The lunar capture is scheduled for the coming Thursday around 2 p.m. UTC. In this maneuver, we should actually make the spacecraft go slower in order to be captured by the moon gravity and not to be sent to the deep space by the gravity of the moon. It's a simple maneuver, but it's very important and very critical. Regarding the landing will begin at an altitude of about 15 kilometers. It will take about 25 minutes, and the spacecraft will travel about 750 kilometers toward the landing site.
And as we roll into the last minute on the lighter side, who came up with the name and how?
Well, we actually took it to the public. The we had a few names. I think it was about 7 or 8 names, and the public chose Beresheet. That's how it was. We had they had a vote, and Beresheet was chosen. And in the beginning, Beresheet sounded, I think, a bit off for us because it wasn't a name. But now it makes so much sense because it's Beresheet is in the beginning, and this is the first spacecraft that Israel has ever sent to the moon. And it's the beginning, and Beresheet symbolizes so much. And I think that in the end, it was a perfect name. So the public chose a very good name, and it works for us.
I think it's a wonderful name, and the only name I think could have come close to it, you mentioned at the very beginning, Chutzpah. It's an amazing program, and it's a fantastic name.
Well, it definitely has been, and we will all be tracking this with our eyes riveted over the next few days. Good luck to everybody. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.